Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Isaac Murphy. I'm a Marine Education Fellow here at the UGA Marine Education Center and Aquarium. I'm going to be your moderator today, and welcome to the Wetlands and Wetland Restoration webinar. We're going to learn all about these amazing ecosystems, why they're so important, and how you yourself can help better protect them so they can do their important jobs. We're joined today by Luke Roberson, our Adopt a Wetland coordinator, who knows more about wetlands than anyone I know. So he's definitely the man to talk to on this topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to him. If you have any questions for Luke, feel free to put them in the chat or Q&A throughout the webinar, and he will answer those as we go along. And Luke, you can take it away.
Thanks so much, Isaac. Again, my name is Luke Robertson. I'm the Adopt a Wetland coordinator for UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. And today we're going to talk a little bit about wetlands, their benefits, kind of the threats they are encountering currently, and ways we restore them or protect them here in the United States. And really, to just give you a basic overview, wetlands are a special ecosystem where land and water meet. In these places, the animals and plants have adapted to live in water or wet soil. You might encounter a wetland in the mountains of northern Georgia, forests throughout the state, or in the brackish and salty waters that we have on the coast. Many years ago, wetlands were thought of as kind of wasted land to be drained and developed into farmland, housing, or industry. In addition, they also had a reputation for harboring disease in the form of mosquitoes and other kind of different ways. Today, we know they have how beneficial wetlands can be, and millions of dollars are spent each year restoring them to help them provide the services that they used to. Our session today, we'll talk about the value that wetlands provide to our local communities and government and environment, the threats to our wetlands, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the wetland restoration and how it's a growing field that aims to undo past damage and promote future wetland development. To start off, I'll go a little bit, just to back up, we'll start a little bit about what UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant does here on the coast, just our general mission. But we focus really on research, education, and outreach here on the coast, trying to promote environmental, economic health of the coast through outreach, education, and research, as I said. And this is just one example, and really wetland restoration and wetland science ties in a lot of these goals for us all together. And I'm really happy to have you all joining us today for this educational session. First, to get your mind thinking about wetlands, we'll have a little quiz, and Isaac will drop down a poll in just a second. Often when we talk about wetlands and their benefits to the coast, we talk about climate change or greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. Many plants take this gas from the atmosphere and store it in the roots, leaves, and stems. And as you might imagine, places that have lots of plants can store lots of carbon. So here's our question. Carbon dioxide is absorbed by plants and help reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Which habitat holds most carbon? And Isaac will drop down the poll to see if you all know which habitat holds the most carbon on the planet. We'll just give you a couple of seconds for that. See a couple of good answers. Yeah, just a few questions, or a few more seconds for this. Right, so there's our results. 4 of our group had wetlands, 2 had rainforest. And so this is a really, really good question for a lot of people, because a lot of people think that rainforests are really, really important to pulling in greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, pulling it out of the atmosphere. And they are extremely important habitats and ones that are definitely under threat. But the answer is actually wetlands. The real difference is kind of in a concept that people call blue carbon. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Coastal blue carbon, and it's the way that wetlands store carbon in these coastal habitats. When when plants pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they incorporate it into their leaves and their stems, and they hold it that way. But the thing is, with rainforests, when the trees die or the land is upset, those gases then get released back into the atmosphere. They rot very quickly. Decomposition sets in quite quickly. However, because of the way that the soil is very lacking in oxygen on the coast, these our coastal wetlands, as they die and decompose in the ground, the decomposition happens much slower than it grows. So the carbon that's stored by the leaves and stems of the plants on the coast is incorporated into that soil. And that carbon can be found in coastal soils for hundreds and thousands of years. So keeping our wetlands intact is a great way to reduce greenhouse gases. And this coastal blue carbon term you may see more and more often with regards to our coast and how it can be protected, and how it's a really good tool in our fight against greenhouse gases and climate change. So keep a lookout for that kind of tool. We actually have a couple of links that we'll post in the chat as well that have more information about coastal blue carbon. And I'll make sure that Isaac should put those up as we move along. So now we'll move on right to the benefits of wetlands. This is a map of the tropical storms and hurricanes that we've had in Georgia just since 2016. So this is not a long period of time, but as you can see, we've had several storms come through, some wreaking millions and millions of dollars worth of damage. And it kind of shuddered to think of what these storms would do if we didn't have these buffers from storm surges and flooding. Considering the kind of flooding that we had in Irma and the wind damage we had in Matthew, things could have been much worse. And especially Dorian, which is a much more flood that could have been much worse with regards to flooding. I think our wetlands really earned their keep by protecting us from these kind of these areas and these dangers. Another benefit that we have for our wetlands, of course, it's a nursery, grocery store, habitat for fish, shellfish, bird species. If you like oyster roast, you like shrimp, and if you like fishing without this kind of habitat out there, it would be really thin pickings there at Russo's or anything like that for getting some fresh fish or shrimp. Also, the benefits of wetlands are they're a filter for pollutants, kind of seining out a lot of the nasty stuff that comes down our rivers from, say, cities that are upstream. Also, the nutrients and sediment that might come off of developed land. So you have nutrients coming from a lot of the farms upstream, but there's been a lot of research pointing out how much of these nutrients get filtered out of the water from our freshwater and saltwater wetlands. This is one of the reasons why we have very few harmful algal blooms like they might have down in Florida and things like that, because our wetlands are so good at filtering these out. Along with that, combined with our very dynamic tides, makes for a really good kind of buffer system against that kind of danger that we might have. And if you've never heard of a harmful algal bloom, they're pretty nasty things. If you have a lot of nutrients coming down the water, or coming down the watershed, downriver, you can get basically a lot of food for algae to eat. And so if you flood the system with a lot of food for this algae, it basically eats itself out of house and home, eating and growing until you have this thing called an algal bloom. And these are pretty big in, say, the Chesapeake Bay, or especially at the bottom of the Gulf where the Mississippi River runs out. And these can lead to big things called dead zones, where the algal blooms eat themselves out of house and home. And as they run out of food, there's microbes that start to eat these starving and dying algae. And then those microbes actually suck oxygen out of the water, just making it inhospitable for any kind of life, fish, shellfish, or even seagrass to survive. So our wetlands do a really good job of filtering these nutrients out, so these things don't happen down here. Also, sediment that can come down from developed land. Whenever you pull trees off the land or clear space for a new parking lot or subdivision, you now have this dirt that's now loose that can be pushed down when you have big rains. But those our wetlands really do a good job of capturing that sediment and keeping it from flooding into areas with very vulnerable habitat or things like that. Let's see. Again, I mentioned that how the wetlands are the best sink for carbon in the world. When I say sink, it's another term saying like storage mechanism. So there's a lot of really good ways to store carbon and in like natural ways. And the coastal wetlands are really the best habitat for that kind of thing. I think this graphic or a graphic similar to it is also available. I think I put up a link. Isaac should put up a link for something that gives you a little more ideas about blue carbon and the benefits of wetlands for this kind of thing. And really, if you've lived on the coast for any time or spent some time down here, you can really understand the amount of value that coastal folks put on the cultural identity of living on the coast. Your salt life stickers, your folks out on the weekends are heading out to go fishing, to go tubing, spending their time in and around the wetlands in our area. And if you ever have a chance to meet folks from the area who've lived here their entire lives, or shrimpers, or say a member of the Gullah Geechee community who are descendants of freed slaves from many years ago, their connection to the wetlands and the coastal communities is extremely tight. So it really forms an impressive cultural identity for the coast. So protecting these lands really are important. So I have another quiz, and this slide really sums it up well. So there's a concert coming to Savannah pretty soon, and it has a couple of '90s, early 2000s bands. And when I heard the lineup, I was like, oh, this is perfect for my wetland poll and one of my other questions. So we have three bands: Puddle of Mud, Sponge, and Filter. And if you're my age, you know of all three of these bands, whether you like it or not. And so I was wondering, if you were to put these out, which of these names, which one of these would actually sum up our coastal wetlands the best? Would it be Puddle of Mud, Sponge, Filter, or all of the above? And if you ever get a chance, you go into YouTube and check out these rock bands. If you're of a certain age, like I am, you'll have extreme flashbacks of late high school, early college, and it's quite unsettling sometimes. But it looks like we have all of our Maggie's raised her hand. She shared age from that one, but so that's fun. Anyway, it looks like the poll is done. And yes, we have one person go for Filter, but all of the above is definitely the answer. It's our wetlands are a filter for pollutants and sediments. They're a sponge for nutrients and pesticides that come down the rivers. And in general, they're a puddle of mud. So if you've ever stepped into pluff mud or anything like that here on the coast, and it sucks you in or sucks your shoe off, you know exactly what we're talking about when it comes to a big puddle of mud sometimes. So just to go with that one, we'll move on from that. But that's I thought that was a really good tie-in for our talk today. Let's see. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the history of wetlands. I know this is a kind of a word-heavy slide, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it. In the early 600s, we had about 221 million acres of wetlands in the lower 48 states. And those were, of course, used primarily for hunting grounds or fishing grounds. from native folks, and they were basically left to do their own thing for a long time. But with European settlement, we saw a lot of land clearing to clear land for housing or farm fields, and this is where really the idea that wetlands were considered a nuisance, swampy lands that bred disease, stopped travel. They impeded agriculture and frontier survival there. So really, they were seen as really everything kind of antithetical to the frontier mindset. They were really trying to just survive out there, and these wetlands, this habitat was reviewed as an impediment to that. So you started seeing actually hand-dug trenches and ditches starting to drain out this land. So incredible manual labor, often done by enslaved people or indentured servants, to try to transfer these lands to upland. You saw a lot of what we still see evidence of today, these mosquito ditches. If you actually go out into our campus, just down one of our trails, or look at our campus from Google Maps, you can actually see some of these streams that are cut at right angles. And some of these were cut for rice fields and things like that. Another scarring of the landscape that still exists today. But some of these were carved as mosquito ditches, which are really trying to drain out these wetlands out to the rivers to try to get these lowlands that were seen as breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease, and change them over. We still see several of our wetlands here on campus affected by these mosquito ditches. So when we see rising sea levels, or we see more saltwater coming in those mosquito ditches, we're seeing some of our freshwater wetlands being changed into saltwater wetlands. So land use that was done hundreds of years ago still affects us today, and we see it especially on these coastal landscapes. It's very impressive to look at Google Maps and just get some of the satellite view and see kind of the scars that have been left on the landscape from this kind of development that started hundreds of years ago. As time progressed, we started to see more and more pushes of this kind of development westward, all the way across the United States. Then we started to see more technology, the finances like banks and things like that push for this kind of development, and even policy was just all aligned to destroy wetland habitats. Really, especially starting in 1900 to 1950, we're really pushing this kind of developed land. But we started to see a changeover in the 1960s with the Earth Day movement and things like that. We started to see a real more appreciation for natural wetlands and realizing the services that they provide. So we started to see more action on policy changes, policies like the Swamp Buster legislation, which it really kind of incentivizes farmers to not develop agricultural land or let it go fallow into wetlands. So things like that have really helped push this sort of wetland restoration mindset, and hopefully it continues. But it's a large project, and it's ongoing now. And you can see a lot of the work, even around here. You can see some of the work for wetland restoration, small scale, large scale. It's quite dramatic. So the many threats to coastal wetlands are kind of as follows, and I've kind of gone a little bit over these in history, but these are what's going on even now. So we see a lot of habitat lost when we develop coastal wetlands or drain them out. We also see the conversion of land use to more urban areas. So not only do you get loss of tidal wetlands and these buffer zones, but now you have impervious surfaces like concrete or asphalt that increase more overland runoff. So if you have really hot summer day like we always have here on the coast, and then rain hits these giant parking lots and runs off into our streams and rivers, that superheated water really can affect the habitat that's shared by the animals in those waterways. So it really affects the wetlands and anything that lives in them. Not only temperature, but also oil, antifreeze, even such things as like brake dust can really get into the waterways and mess things up, mix up the balances there. So, and again, I mentioned development not only with impervious surfaces, but also you're now putting a lot of sediment into the land. As you clear the land off, you now have this exposed dirt, and you have a lot more sediment entering the rivers and streams and clogging up these habitats, clogging gills. It could even clog up gills for like mussels and oysters. It can kind of embed them in the mud sometimes, and not in a good way. It also releases the carbon in the atmosphere by disturbing the wetland soil and plants. So even though like the intact wetlands are really, really good at storing the carbon and pulling it out of their leaves and stems and putting it in the soil, if you disturb that soil, all that progress is lost. It all releases that carbon back into the atmosphere. So it kind of does in the really good work that the wetland is doing, and kind of that's one of the reasons why we'll talk about restoring wetlands and how people try to bring that those traits back. So we also talk about fracturing habitat for animals. So you're now, when you start encroaching into these wetlands, we're starting encroaching into habitat that was used by alligators and fish, crabs, and other things. So now you have a lot of these human-animal interactions, and usually usually the animal loses out on these kind of things. So when we're right in the middle of this habitat, we're kind of the strangers, and it can be a really dicey situation. So that's why these are many, many threats to coastal wetlands. And really, we lose about 80,000 acres of wetland a year in the continental U.S. due to development, habitat loss. There's a lot of different reasons why we lose wetland acres every year. And but the thing is, the 100-mile Georgia coast contains about 20% of the wetlands on the entire Atlantic coast. So we do have really good wetlands on our coast. I think some of the policy that has been done in the past has done a lot to promote that. But it is really, really impressive when, say, if you're going over to Brunswick or coming around from Jekyll or something like that, or many, many places on the coast, that you actually get a really good view of the expanse of our Georgia wetlands. So keeping that intact is a really important job. But the Georgia population is still expanding and expanding quickly. A lot of people are finding how beautiful our coast is and are developing as fast as they possibly can. And the population was estimated to increase 50% from 2000 to 2030. And we're in the midst of that kind of development boom. There's not many places that you can go now to the coastal Georgia and you don't see new houses coming up. It's kind of blows my mind when I go to kind of sleepy areas that might be like in McIntosh County, and you start to see more and more developments coming in. And McIntosh County really is almost 50% wetland as it is. So any kind of incursion to that, it might be pretty dramatic for that area. So to recap on kind of a depressing section of the talk, how many acres of wetlands are lost each year in the lower 48 states? And Isaac, you can put the poll up for this one. We just talked about it, but it just want to drive it home. It looks like everybody's nailing it so far, but it's pretty dramatic to kind of think about how many acres we lose each year. Go just a second to go in. So yeah, it's 80,000 acres a year we lose in the continental U.S. Let's see, in Georgia, we actually have about over 7 million acres of wetlands, including freshwater areas here on the coast, on the coast and inland. And we even have, amazing gems like the Okefenokee Swamp. Like this is one of the biggest freshwater wetlands in the United States, and it's a place definitely worth protecting. not only for its beauty, and if you ever gotten to camp there, it's amazing. And it's really a gem that we should protect here on the coast, or anywhere, really. But so now we're going to move on to our main topic, which is how do we preserve, restore, reestablish our wetlands after kind of a long period of mistreatment and destruction? And what are the pros and cons of different approaches that we often take? So what do we do now? So now we know how great these things are, but we know here's the things that are kind of downgrading and degrading our wetlands. What can we do to offset or more restore this balance? Folks like the USDA have spent over $4.2 billion, billion with a B, in protecting and preserving wetlands over the past 2 decades. So there's no shortage of money being thrown at the problem. I've been part of this kind of effort on restoring streams, living shorelines, things like this. When I used to work in Maryland at a previous job, and there was an amazing amount of money being put into these solutions. But one question is, are we spending the money in the right way? Are we doing the most? Are we using this money in the most efficient way possible? Looking for the most bang for the buck. So we look at different methods of how we preserve, protect, and improve our wetlands. How are we going to do that kind of thing? So we'll look at the different methods of how we do these things. So there's 3 main methods that you can go to. Creation of wetlands, kind of where there was no wetlands, there now are wetlands. Reestablishment. So this can be a mix of rehabilitation or an enhancement. So this is where there used to be wetlands, or the wetlands were very degraded, or maybe you were taking a wetland and tweaking it a little bit. That's kind of a couple of different kind of sub methods of reestablishment. So that's another one of the big ones we'll talk about. And then preservation, where you have intact wetlands and just protecting them, keeping them from being developed, keeping them from being incurred upon, and keeping them from being degraded. So those are the 3 main methods. We'll go right into them. The benefits of creating wetlands are you now create out of whole cloth sometimes habitat for wildlife and pollinators. You now have the filtration for runoff where you didn't have it before. Slowing the erosion. You're building in these functions that an established wetland has, and in areas where you might really see the benefits of putting these in. You now have these recreational and aesthetic improvements to the land. So where you used to have maybe just a field that was fallow, or say it was old industrial land or things like that, you now have a park that you can go see. You now have a place where you can go maybe fishing, go boating, birding, things like this. So now you have this recreational establishment that you can go see. And these can be small and big projects. So, and to show you a couple of small projects, go visit our website for our Ecoscapes program. And we also have a rain garden app. Both of these tools, and Isaac will put these links to these pages in our chat, are great ways for people to get involved in building your own little rain gardens. And these are tiny little wetlands, but they really, really make a difference as they add up. They provide habitat for pollinators and other critters that might run around your yard. They are great filters of water, so it slows the flow of water coming off your roof or down your driveway. It slows the flow of that going into our streams. And as that percolates through the ground, it starts to filter out a lot of the impurities or pollutants that might be there. So there's a lot of really good tools here on our website that you can check out, and really has from top to bottom tools that you can use to build these things. Of course, these are usually small, backyard, front yard establishments. These are really pretty small wetlands, but they do make a difference. And for an example, for a big one, there's Cay Creek Wetlands Interpretive Wetland out there in Midway in Liberty County. And this is a much bigger, this is pretty much like a demonstration project of all these different ways we can use wetlands. And this is definitely almost pretty much a created, I would say, established wetland now. And it's got lots of cool stuff to see. Definitely go check it out. It's close by. It was right along the coast. But this is definitely a project that is very, very large and took a lot of effort and money to build. So if you get a chance, though, there's another link that I think Isaac can put in the chat that gives you really a rundown of what it took to create this wetland. And the engineering required is pretty intense. So building these things creates an amazing park. And one of the coolest things about this kind of park is really integrated into the landscape. So creating this wetland not only provides a lot of benefits of filtration and sponge, those buffers and things like that, but it's an amazing aesthetic improvement to the landscape. So it's really a neat project. And if you ever get a chance to check out the plan that details, how this was built and the effort that was needed, it's really, really impressive and more in depth than we can maybe get into today. But these kind of projects do have drawbacks. These projects are very expensive. If you're looking for bang for the buck, maybe not the greatest thing to do, but I mean, pulling people in to see the values of wetlands and making it easier for them to interact is really important. But these do require a lot of maintenance and equipment, not only to just put them in, but to maintain them in the future. Even though we have very experienced engineers and hydrologists, which study the flow of water through the land, and working on these projects, sometimes pathways get filled with sediment. You have trees falling down that need to be moved. You have pathways that need to be make sure they're clear. So these kind of projects often have a lot of work going in. Some people might have pumps that are pumping water in different directions that need to be maintained. So sometimes they can be really hard to establish and maintain to establish their functionality that a wetland that has been there for years and years and years already has. So there's been studies saying that it takes a long time for a created wetland to have the functionality that an established wetland has. And it takes decades or more for created wetlands, sometimes rehabilitated wetlands, to really have the filtering power, the buffering power, and the amount of carbon, pull that carbon down into the soils. It takes a while for that kind of establishment to take effect. So you're looking at trying to see, is this a worthwhile endeavor, or should we just kind of let it go fallow and figure out what's going on? It's a case by case basis kind of decision. So next we'll move to the reestablishment of wetlands, or sometimes we're restoring degraded wetlands to a previous state. This is usually where we are taking area. Usually this is going to be changing the water flow in some way in a landscape where, say, like I mentioned, mosquito ditches or other kind of ditches that were used to drain lands. So you are plugging those ditches and you are now letting that area get wet again and stay wet. And that would be one way of reestablishing a wetland. There's lots of other different ways to do it, like you're putting in berms where there were now, which is kind of like a small dam where water used to drain, just blocking up those kind of pathways of water to get away from this land. And now you're kind of holding the water in there. And then you're often planting more native species are usually pretty common. You're often putting these plants that are really more adapted to these wet conditions. So if it's been drained for a long time, a lot of the trees and things like that might be living there won't be able to handle that water. So if you're doing this kind of rehabilitation, you might lose a lot of species, but you want to make sure that you're replacing with native species that are more adapted to that landscape. Costs are much lower for this restoration versus creation process because you're not being as invasive to the landscape. You're not digging trenches. You're not usually unless you're trying to get water into the area, but you can restore a wetland for much cheaper than you can do with creation. And then because a lot of the functionality is like the base functionality for those wetlands is usually there already, it's quicker to gain the functions of established wetlands than a created wetlands from kind of whole cloth. So the reestablishment of wetlands is a really big business, and I think that happens a lot more often than the wholesale creation of wetlands. So we see this process playing out quite a bit. So the preservation of wetlands, and this is one of the methods that we really touch on and are pretty important. It's the protection of established areas. So these are areas that have already wetlands, and they have been undisturbed, and you're really just saying these lands are set aside to not be disturbed. These will not be developed. Because of that, you leave the habitat for all the critters that live out there, and the connectivity between those areas and left is now intact. So your alligators can travel from one mud hole to the other. They can travel around for food. They're not venturing out and across, into subdivisions or down more populated areas looking for food. They have this large range where they can kind of be themselves and hang out. So you don't have as many of those human-animal interactions that can be kind of dangerous. And you maintain all the functionality. It's doing its job as a buffer, as a filter, as this sponge, as a puddle of mud. It maintains all that functionality. You don't lose any of that because you've never lost it. And the cost of maintenance is usually pretty low, unless if you're trying to. Sometimes the trade-offs might be between development and protecting your wetlands, and there's some of that push and pull economically in certain areas. Do we want to put this housing development in because it will bring more taxes in the area, or do we protect our wetlands because they protect the places, people who already are there from the pollutants and storm surge and things like that? What's the balance in that kind of thing? And it's, I think city and county managers struggle with that a lot. Of course, I think preserving your wetlands is always going to be the winner for me. So we'll get onto one of our last quizzes here. Really, when it comes to our methods of wetland restoration, what gives us the biggest bang for the buck? Creation of wetlands, reestablishment of wetlands, preservation, or they are all about equal? All right, I'm seeing several people go in. All right. And we have a couple good answers. So we have one person going with reestablishment, which is actually a good guess too. Preservation is the right answer. It really does give you the best bang for the buck. But reestablishment can be tailored to different areas. So there's one way of reestablishing wetlands. It's called enhanced wetlands. So say you've got a wetland that's doing its own thing. It's really good, but boy, it'd be great if we could say make this more of this wetland more friendly for ducks, because then maybe you can get hunters there who then they would take ownership of the land but protect it in the long run. But you're looking for, or maybe I want to open this area up just a bit where we can put in some trails, or like I want to do a couple of like odds and ends, like small things like that. So you're increasing the value of the preservation of the land in the long term, but you're what we call enhancing the wetland. And sometimes you're doing something with the drainage a little bit. Sometimes you're adding this, that, and the other. But that can also be a really good trade-off because whereas some people still will see untouched wetlands as kind of wasted land. Boy, it would be nice if we could do something with that. People might see a park that's in a wetland, or trails, or hunting areas. They might see those as a valuable land that, hey, I do things here that are very important, that are tied to the land. Now my values are tied to that land. So there's a really good argument for reestablishing wetlands. Creation can be a really good use of effort, because like I said, we lose so many acres of wetland a year, and sometimes those areas where those wetlands used to be is just gone. Like they're now a strip mall or something like that, and it's a real bummer. But there's maybe there are better places to start. Hey, to start thinking about building wetlands. Maybe it requires a lot of effort, but it can bring something to an area that maybe didn't have it before, and really increase that value that people can attach to the land, that we talked about a little bit before. All right. Let's see. I think actually after this last question, I'd like to take other questions. I see one popped up in the Q&A. Before I get to our kind of like what do you do, or what ways you can help out, let's take a few questions just on everything we've talked about, because I know I've thrown a lot at you. Before we get into how can you get involved, what questions do we have? So I get a question from David. What is the damage done by saltwater storm surge on freshwater wetlands? That is an excellent question. It's one we've been talking about here quite a bit. Saltwater storm surge and saltwater sea level rise is a really big threat on the coast here. If you go to Savannah Wildlife Refuge on the other side of the river in South Carolina, you'll see it firsthand. This is an area that is full of it's basically old rice fields, but these are freshwater wetlands inhabited by tons and tons of birds, alligators, you name it. That you can. It's a really impressive place to go and just drive their wildlife trail and see all sorts of cool stuff. However, with the dredging of the Savannah River, you're seeing a lot more salt water go higher and higher up into the watershed. And that salt water is right against the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. So we're seeing more salt water get into those areas. And there are ways for the managers at that reserve to keep that salt water from moving in. There's a lot of dikes and pumps and things like that to help them keep the salt water away. But it might be a losing battle in the future if the sea levels keep raising and that salt water keeps pushing. Here on campus, not too far from where I sit, we actually have a freshwater wetland that has one of those mosquito ditches right next to it, and we are seeing like the salt water that used to come in that's come in through one of these mosquito ditches starting to change that freshwater wetland into a saltwater wetland, where there used to be aquatic plants like duckweed, which really only like freshwater habitats. We're now seeing more of that transfer over to like black needlerush and spartina in that area. So it's kind of almost a half and half, like kind of going against each other. Like the more upland area is freshwater, and the more closer to the river is saltwater. And let's see, David, you have lots of good questions. Let's see, I want to move on just to make sure we don't run out of time. And I'm going to catch up here if we have enough time at the very end. That's okay. So I'm going to keep these open just for the very end. But these are very good. Okay. How can I get involved? So there's many ways to get involved. We talked about the Ecoscapes program. The link is in the chat, so definitely check that out. Plant your own rain garden. It's your one way of creating your a wetland right in your yard or in your neighborhood. And it can be a real hub for pollinators. It looks beautiful. They're really cool. I love having rain gardens around. Participate in the cleanup. One way to help preserve your wetlands is to clean them up. We are actually having a coastal cleanup down at Tybee on June the 19th. And the link to that will be in the chat as well if you want to register for that one. We'll have COVID restrictions in place to make sure we're distancing and kind of doing it in shifts for the time being. But check out the registration if you'd like to join us on June the 19th. We'll be doing it that morning at Tybee Pier, working with the folks out at Tybee Clean Beach Volunteers again. So they're a great group to join up and join your local advocacy group. Talk to your river keepers. Up here in Savannah, we have our Savannah River Keeper, a Geechee River Keeper. But going down the coast, we have other groups like 100 Miles, Nature Conservancy, folks that are really dedicated to protecting our wildlands, our ecosystems here on the coast. So join those groups, because really finding your group with there is really helpful in making an impact on your local ecosystems and community. And come visit our local wetlands. If you're not coming to us here on the coast around on Skidaway Island here, go down to Midway in Liberty County. Check out Cade Creek Wetlands Interpretive Center out there. It is a really it's another gem that we have. Go to Okefenokee, build up that kind of value and respect we have that you need for these wetlands, for these habitats that are so dynamic and important. So those are the things I would say. And of course, since I'm the adopted wetland coordinator, I think you should monitor your wetlands too. So I would like to just talk to you very shortly about the volunteer monitoring program we have here on coastal Georgia. So I give training and equipment for folks to learn more about water quality here on the coast, and also to activate your education and go out and monitor water quality all up and down the coast. So we have some really good participants here with us. I know Maggie is one of my favorite volunteers, and she works her tail off helping out educate kids about water quality. And it's really impressive to see some of our volunteers and the work they do on the coast. So if you're ever interested in that, we are going to have a public training announcement very soon, so we can start getting more people out and about. We'll do virtual trainings where we do like presentation on Zoom, kind of like this, and then we'll meet up in person to do a kind of a demonstration. We can do distance and be outside and enjoy the weather while it's not so hot. So yeah, come out and do that. But the take-home lessons I've got for you today are really that wetlands support our coastal communities in a variety of important ways. Like, again, the sponge, the filter, the grocery store, the carbon sequestration that the wetlands provide. I want you to know the term coastal blue carbon. I think it's a term that you might hear more and more often here on the coast. And it's how it's stored in coastal marshland reduces greenhouse gases. And the last one is that the most cost-effective way to restore wetlands is to preserve them in the first place. So, it's one of those things about an ounce of I forget the saying is, but was an ounce of preservative is worth a pound of cure, kind of something like that. So something when you can protect them from being developed in the first place, you don't have to spend the money and make the effort to restore them. So it's a big deal. So that's my big take-home messages there today. Let's see. And now, around the questions. So David has a couple others that I want to get to now. I have a little bit of time left. So are Georgia and South Carolina wetlands receiving sediment to keep up with sea level rise? That's a good question. I haven't seen any of the land rising up or anything like that. And I think you mentioned also land dredging materials used to build up or restore wetlands. I have not seen that method used in a lot of areas, just because we do have a lot of dredge islands. Several on the coast. If you're just, if you get a chance to go down the coast, you'll see a lot of these dredge areas. If you go from downtown Savannah, over to like Whitmarsh Island, you come over some of the dredge islands that were used to make Thunderbolt Marine. Or if you're coming from, say you're on a boat coming from Savannah going up towards, Defusky Island, you'll pass Jones Island, which is all dredge, which is a pretty large island. And it's large enough to support deer and lots of other wildlife out that way. So I'm not sure if that dredge material is ever being used to restore wetlands, as opposed to just being dumped on these islands. And I'm not sure if using that dredge material would be the right way to restore wetlands. That's a good question. I'm unfortunately not the expert on that kind of application. A lot of the ways I see wetlands being restored, it's usually like changing the flow of water. That's probably 80% of the methods that people use to restore wetlands. So I guess you could use dredge material for, say, like building berms, kind of like corralling the water into certain areas if you were creating a wetland. Or a lot of times if people are using planting, like native plants, to start plugging up the old drains. But oftentimes, honestly, with sea level rise, we're seeing a lot of these areas just simply go underwater, which can be pretty tough. And building up islands made with dredge material, some of those islands, I'm trying to think of, some of them have kind of reverted back to wetlands. I mean, really, if you look at that, kind of the weird one that's over by Thunderbolt, as you come over the bridge over the river there, it seems like kind of marshland on the edges. In the center, it looks like a giant crater, which is very weird looking. But I imagine that those kind of areas that were dredged, I'm trying to think how old that dredge area is. That's quite old. They may be reverting to wetlands. So maybe those dredge islands have been there for long enough where the outskirts might be turning into established wetlands if they've been there for that long. But that kind of goes to that same point that I mentioned earlier, that it takes a long time for areas like that to turn back into functional wetlands. Whereas you've established or rehabilitated wetlands, you gain that functionality much quicker. So that's a good question. That's very impressive. I think we're almost the end, so I'd love to hear any more questions if anybody has any. If not, shoot me an email. If I don't think I put this in the chat, but Isaac can put it in there. Luke F. Robertson at uga.edu. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I like to take time out of a day to answer those kind of questions. I love discussions about wetlands and ways can we preserve them, and how they really interact with the people on the coast. It's one thing. I'm from Kentucky. I've lived in several different places before I moved down to Savannah, and the connection that people here have on the coast is real and true and very authentic. It's very impressive, and it's very necessary. It's very you see it. It's very necessary to see that kind of connection and the way people protect their lands. They see the value in being outside and protecting their outside spaces for a variety of reasons. And everybody has their own, and you kind of see that when you talk to more and more people here on the coast. So with that, I might wrap it up. Isaac, do you have anything else for us?
I think that's it. I just wanted to say thank you to any friends of the aquarium that are online. Y'all's generous donations have allowed us to purchase filming equipment that has helped us adapt to COVID and put on all of these virtual webinars. So thank you for that. And if you were interested in becoming a friend of the aquarium, please visit our website for more information on that. I also want to let you know of our last webinar in May. It's going to be on May 24th. It is Drought-Tolerant Coastal Landscapes for Water Conservation. So you'll learn all about the Ecoscapes program. That'll be on May 24th from 12 to 1. It's also free. You can register on the events page on our website and learn all about how to do some eco-friendly landscaping that you may be considering doing in your yard. If you have any more questions, about wetlands, feel free to reach out to Luke with that email address that I put in the chat box. And I think that's it for today. Luke, thank you so much for all that very important information. And thank you for our lovely audience for coming and chatting with us about wetlands.
Thanks again so much, and I really appreciate it, and hopefully see you again around sometime.